All right. So even though it is 8, we are gonna wait, I'd say another 5 or so minutes for everyone to join. Do let me know if my audio is okay, if you can hear me. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Do let me know if you can see my screen here. Okay, perfect. All right, so yesterday we talked about arrays. We've been talking about a lot of other data types over the past 2 weeks. So I thought I'd just do a quick recap on data types before we talk about our next data type, which is objects. So if everyone can just let me know, what are some data types we've covered so far in the chat? Right, so we have strings, perfect. Have strings, we have numbers, booleans, yep, we do have booleans. So booleans, okay, I see so symbol is one, booleans. We didn't cover it though, so switch is not a data type. So switch is like a type of logic we can use to handle if-else cases, yeah. So everything I'm going to write here are data types we have covered so far. And yeah, number is a data type. So booleans, let's look at like what booleans are. So we have booleans, we have true and false, right? Those are our two types of booleans we can have. And then string, you could just write in a string, it can just be ABC. Maybe it can be an empty string. There's a lot of variety here. We did cover number, yeah. So let me actually write number here. But I do want to clarify that, there are many different kinds of numbers, but as far as JavaScript is concerned, these are all numbers. So I remember that there was something like 0.92, and this was called a float. So technically this is called a float, but in JavaScript, this is also just a number, a decimal number. And we have a whole number like 7 or, 32. These are all numbers. Array, or yes, so array was another data type that we covered yesterday. Absolutely. And let's draw that out. So we have an array, if I remember. So array is just like, it's a collection of items. Now we can have many different kinds of data. We can have numbers inside arrays. We can have strings inside of arrays. We can have booleans inside of arrays, as you can see here. And the benefit of the array is that it's indexed. So there's sort of a hidden index here. I'm just going to label that with I. And that lets us refer to items in this array by position. So it always starts at 0. So we could, if we have sort of 0, we can access this item in the array. Yeah, array is a data type, it's a type of data. If we have 1, we can access the string A. If we have 2, we can access true, Boolean, and so on. So that's just a recap on a few of those things. Does anyone have any questions about like anything here? Let's not worry about references right now, but I will sort of group these in the next slide, but let's not worry about references. So any other questions about these data types or any clarifications? For sure. So let's go into the index a little bit more here. I'll actually draw it out. Okay, so I can't cover everything in the lecture array. I can quickly go over the idea of indexing. And then array will be talked about a little bit in this lecture as well. So, but I think the most important thing from the array, the most important takeaway is that the array is a collection of items that have an index sort of built into them. And so the most important takeaway from the array, I'm just going to draw it here. So let's say we have our array. I'm going to just write some code. Let x equal, and then I'm going to put make an array of fruits. So let's say we have apple, mango, and orange, right? So the benefit of the array is that it lets us store a collection of items, multiple items. In this case, these are all strings in one place. So we can have like almost like 3 strings in one variable here, x. So that's the benefit of the array. Now, the idea of indexing is that sort of built into this array, we have an index structure where the index 0 refers to apple, 1 is to mango, 2 is to orange, and so on. And so what that lets us do is it lets us like access items in this array. So if we do x and then we use square brackets, let's say 0, if we wanted to print this, like what is this would be a good question. And so we're taking what this does is it says, okay, you're referring to this array. Exactly, right. And I'm going to use square brackets because that's just a convention. And then we have inside here is the index that we want to look at. And so at that index, we have apple. So that's what would be inside, what would be stored at that point. So if I were to, if I were to wrap this, let me make another example that's a little bit clearer. Because what would this print? Now we'll write this out. Exactly. So this prints mango because x, like this array, and then 1 is the index in this array. Okay, it's pointing to mango. And the square brackets are just a way of accessing that particular string in that array. And so then this becomes mango, and then console log, the string mango is just mango. Exactly. All right, I hope I covered the idea of indexing here, if anybody has any. So there is a limit. If you were to try to, let's see, I wonder what would happen if you tried to console log x of 5. And this list, it only goes up to 2. Exactly. So it would be, this is actually a good time to pull up the VS Code terminal. I do believe it would be undefined because we're trying to use an index to access something in the array that is beyond the length of the array. So there's nothing actually there. But just in case, I just want to double check that that is actually what it prints, if it prints undefined or if it prints null. So let's see what that does. Yeah, so it gives us undefined. So this would output in your console, in your terminal, it would output undefined. And undefined has a very technical meaning in JavaScript. So undefined refers to something that has not been assigned a value. Because again, at that index, nothing exists, so that no value has been assigned to that x of 5. All right, does anyone have any other questions about arrays or anything on these data types? All right, awesome. All right, let's see what is up next. So actually, before we get to the next bit, I do want to circle some things here that I think are really important. So I am going to circle because someone mentioned primitive, so I thought I would just very briefly talk about how we group these together. So strings, booleans. Yep. Shamina, do you have a question?
Yes, actually, I would like to know the array. Can we use the array in the switch case?
That is a good question. Let's see. So as far as I know, it was just a, let's try that out. Right, because you're thinking maybe the switch case sort of goes over each item in the array.
Yeah.
Let's try that out. I don't think we can, but it's good to test that. So I'm just going to test that here because actually I have no idea. Let's see if that happens. If there's some like internal logic that can actually handle that. It's a good question. So as you can see, I don't have all the answers. And that's why it is really good to test things and just to see if they work. So I'm just gonna really quickly write out some code here if everyone can see that. So I hope this is sort of the logic. Let's say default, and let's just console log 3. And let's see what happens if we do that. So let's see if it, if it treats cases in that way, if it can sort of take each one. Interesting. So it prints 3, and I think because when it sees this, it doesn't actually, it just sees the whole array. And so it doesn't handle this by looking into these items and then sort of trying to parse the logic that way. It just sees an array and then it's like, okay, that is not equal to, because the array itself is not equal to apple and the entire array is not equal to mango. So it just goes into this default case and prints 3, as we can see here. So I hope that clarifies that the switch does not work with this. But it's a good thing to always check because, yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, no worries. All right, so I just wanted to clarify that we can categorize these data types, and this is sort of how it's done. So in like red, I'm just circling string, boolean, and number. And all of these together are what's referred to as primitive data types. Primitive data types. You don't need to know anything more than that, but just know that these are sort of considered similar in that way. They're all primitive data types. Arrays and what we're going to talk about today, objects, are what's called complex data types. So again, you don't need to know, what that means at a sort of deeper level, but just this idea that JavaScript treats these similarly. These are primitive, and then arrays and objects are complex. And we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between sort of these two categories later on. Oh, I see someone has their hand raised, or maybe from the previous question. Okay. So before we get to, yeah, so data structures will come later. Usually, yeah, so we'll talk about data structures later and, how those are represented. Good question, though. All right, so I think before we actually talk about objects in the code, let's just talk about some everyday examples. So right now, I am doing this meeting, I'm coding, I am looking at my my lecture notes. I'm doing all of this on a laptop. So, a laptop is a good example of an object. And the laptop that I have that I just got is a Dell XPS. And so here, these are some, properties or attributes of of this object laptop. It's a Dell XPS, which makes me wish I got a MacBook instead. So it's an XPS, it has some amount of RAM. Let's just say think 8 gigs, and it has a video card. That's another attribute. So we can think of, a good starting point would be to think of objects as things that have attributes. It has a certain hard drive capacity. It has a certain weight. I think this thing is like 3 pounds or something like that. It's quite light. 3 pounds, maybe even a bit less than that. Yeah, so before we get started on objects, just thinking in terms of every day, we have an object, and then we have certain attributes that we associate with that object. So now let's talk about objects a little bit more in detail. And one way to think about this before we actually draw out our object is to think of object as a set of key value pairs. So let's just say key value pairs. What are these? So typically key value pairs in JavaScript sort of look like this. So we can have a key. Keys are strings, by the way. At least we're going to think of them as strings. And then the value can be any other type of data. I'll do this in red. This value is any other type of data, including strings, that is associated with that key. So an example I could give would be, let's just say fruit. And so fruit is the key in this relationship between this key value pair. And maybe the value is an array of my favorite fruit. So I'm going to put mangoes, and sure, let's put tomato. I think tomato is a fruit, actually. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions about this idea of keys and values being associated as pairs in this sort of way? And this is a semicolon. No, this is a colon that I'm using to associate these two, keys and values. So we'll go into what this does later, but a key value pair, it's just a way to relate two data elements, a key and a value. So you can almost think of these are literally a pair, they're linked. And I wouldn't say to worry about dictionaries right now. Yep, Samra, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just having hard time understanding this key value concept. Can you just repeat? Like, so basically, we have a set for the keys as well, or how does it work?
You can just think of this as its own individual unit. It's a way to relate two data elements. So we're
I
relating
mean,
this key.
I mean, key is a variable.
No, this is not. This is something separate. So we can just think of just in it as itself. This is just a relation we're building. So this is like a small kind of like, I guess if you're building a house, just think of this as like a single unit, like a brick. So this is just by itself. Yeah, don't worry about
Okay.
variables or values. That's a good question though, but yeah. Just think of, I'd say everyone who has questions, just think of this as its own separate little thing where we have a key that is a string and we have a value that is any data type. And we're sort of pairing these two things together. We're pairing these two related data elements. Or even, even better, let's see. I will actually write it like this. Oops. So let's say my name is Alim. So just like that. So these two things are paired. That's a good way to think about it. And this is the building block of an object. let's talk about objects and sort of why I introduced this first. So we talk about my laptop right here. Let's say this laptop. Let's reimagine this laptop, and I'll write some attributes that we can think about. So let's think about the type of the laptop. So the type of the laptop, the weight, RAM, and hard drive space. Let's rewrite these as key value pairs. Yeah, the value can be an array. So in this case, this value, this array, mango and tomato, is associated with this specific key fruit. All right, so what I want everyone to do in this next exercise is think about type, weight, RAM, hard drive as keys, and think about what would the values be for these. They can be strings, they could be arrays, whatever makes the most sense. And think about writing, how would I actually turn this into key value pairs? So I'll do one example, and then I'll have, everyone type in the chat what they think. So let's say the type, and I'm just gonna, the type, and then I have this colon here, and I'll put XPS. So I have sort of translated the type attribute that I mentioned earlier into a key value pair. So yeah, this is an exercise for everyone. Feel free to, in the chat, do the same for RAM or weight and hard drive the same way. Uh-oh, was I unmuted this whole time? Wait, how long was I unmuted? What's the last thing people heard? This is not good. Oh my God, okay. Yikes, I might have unmuted myself a while ago. Or unmuted myself a while ago. So, oh geez, okay. Okay, well that's not, so like these values, right? Interesting. Okay, I might have been moving something around on my screen and muted myself. So yeah, I sort of the goal here is to take these sort of attributes and turn them into key value pairs. If anyone has questions about this, please do let me know, because we have the time to go into questions. If there's any confusions, raise your hand and I can get to it. Samra, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, are you going to step like JavaScript is like an object-oriented programming language, and do we have like those concept of classes that's coming up, or?
Yeah, so this will all be coming up very soon. But
I see.
right now, yeah, this is a great question. So we will, these little building blocks that we're talking about right now, we'll build on this over the next few slides and show how it relates to objects.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I think classes is coming up later this week. So it's a great question. So great, I see some good examples here. All right, let's try that. Let me write out, let's see, hard drive. Perfect. So I see everyone has the right idea. Perfect. Oh, that is a good guess. My hard drive is 1 terabyte. Right. So weight, those could be exactly. So I see an array. Those could be different weights for different laptops. Perfect. Nice. Type MacBook Air. Weight. Drive. Nice. And you know what? Just to be contrarian, I will, let's see, let's try to put a different value. So for RAM, I will put 3. And maybe that 3 is like 3 gigabytes. So we can think of it that way. So we could make an array. The idea is that these things here, these values can be any data type. So right now I'm using string. So I put this in quotation because I'm using string here. I'm using the string XPS as the value for the key type. And I'm using the string 1 TB as the value for the key that is hard drive. But let's say I wanted to, I'll actually type this out so it's a bit easier. But let's say, sure, let's make it an array. So let's say owners, past owners, maybe this laptop has been sold a lot, bought and sold, resold. So you have me, Josh, Eric. So these are all examples. And here we have, this is an array. The value here is an array. It's not a string. And the array is the value associated with the key owners. And more specifically, it's an array of strings. So I see a good question here. Every value should be in quotation marks. So you might be asking about these keys. So yes, over here, I'm just using the quotation marks to specify that these keys are strings, but very shortly, I'll be writing it out in the code terminal, and over there, you don't actually need to do that. Like that's understood. Oh, the values. Oh yeah, the values don't always have to be in an array, absolutely. So I just use these quotations here because this value is a string, and then this value is a string. This value is a number, so I just put 3 here. And this value is an array, so that's why I use the square brackets. So let's draw this out. So values, these can be strings, these can be numbers. We can even have Booleans. So if I have another attribute here, let's just call it new. Is this laptop new? And let's say because it has 3 prior owners, it's not new. So we'll put false. That's the value associated with the key new. So we have that. And we will also put array as another potential type of value that we could have. What about string with number? Oh, you mean something like a string with a number? You mean something like this? Oh, you mean this, 1 TB. Or yeah, exactly, 7Y. So yeah, that's a good point. So sometimes, here, because I want to represent that this 1 has meaning, it's like a terabyte. That's why I put the whole thing as a string. But there are other ways you could do it. You could, notice here in RAM, I just put 3. And then I said that maybe it's understood that this is 3 gigabytes. So that's why I don't put this inside a string and put GB, or I don't turn it into a string. I'm just going to use the number 3 and assume that it's understood that 3 is referring to gigabytes. And maybe if 3 is referring to gigabytes, what could I change 1 terabyte, the string, into to have it just be a number and represent 1 terabyte? Let's assume that exactly. So so let's just assume that our numbers in this context are gigabytes. So I'll just put 1,000 here. Next, as 1,000 is the number that is a value for the hard drive key. So this 1,000 is 1,000 gigabytes in this context, where we're just going to say that numbers for this laptop, when we have numbers, we have gigabytes. So I can just put 1,000. I can just put 3. I don't need to turn this into a string to, and then put GB to preserve that context. All right, awesome. So let's actually get a little bit more into objects. Let us write a few objects out as code. So before we get to that, let me actually very quickly define object here. So we talked about key value pairs, right? Where key is a string and the value is any data type associated with that string. Let me actually zoom in. Okay. All right, so I hope that idea is clear. So let's try this out. So when we actually define an object, like our laptop, we use these special curly braces to begin sort of to encapsulate this object. And then the object is just a bunch of these key value pairs put together inside of these braces. So I remember we talked about the type, we talked about weight, we talked about RAM, owners. So let's try that out. Let us type and then XPS. That's a good example. So one thing is that when you write it out here, you basically, you don't put quotations because it's just understood that this key is a string. RAM was 3, say 3 gigabytes. And it even tells us, if we scroll over this, it says property type string. It's telling us that this value is a string. Property RAM number, it's telling us that this value is a number. And another way to refer to these would be properties. Each of these sort of key value pairs as a property. Does anyone have any questions about this so far? How we went from sort of individual key value pairs to collections of them to then wrapping them around with a curly brace as a way to actually define our object in code. Like leaving the key empty? Oh, okay, so just having like that and just having that empty. So I think that would actually cause some issues. You can't leave it empty. There's a way to, and we can get into that later, there's a way to define something as empty. Oh, like that, or having it. So you can't actually, let's see. So you can, yep, so you can, that's a good question. So you actually can do that. Now, the reason why I have to put braces now is because the key that I am referring to in this object is just an empty string. So you can do that, but let's not do that just for the sake of confusion. All right, does anyone have any questions about sort of this, how we got to this point? So the benefit of using keys and values is that we can, well, we'll go into it right now. So we will, let's say we have an object like this. So type RAM, let's say this is memory space, 1,000 terabytes, and past owners Exactly. It lets us combine these. Yeah, so I didn't put, when I was explaining it, I put it with quotations, but over here you don't need to do that because it's already understood that this is a string. Although if I do that, it's fine. It totally works. But the convention is we don't actually put quotations here, even though this is a string, but we don't put quotations when it's a key inside an object. Yeah. I see a question here someone has about so curly bracket is just how we define the object. We have to surround these key value pairs that we decide to write inside of curly braces. That's just a convention. Yeah, so when I was writing it here, and I'll actually put this here. So when I was writing it here, I put it in quotations. But here you don't need to because it's understood that this is a string. If you want, you can do that and that still works. But it's not necessary to actually do it like that. Because this sort of JavaScript understands that this is a key and it will treat it like a string. Yeah. So commas, we put commas just to separate these from one another, because if I get rid of, so the commas separate one key value pair from the next. If I get rid of that, it'll give me an issue here. It'll say like, I'm expecting a comma, and then like the color kind of messes up there. So it's just a convention that we use. Yeah. All right, awesome. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, perfect. So with that introduced, no, the value does not have to be in capital letters. So I just did that because that's what it's called. You could also do that, and that's totally fine. I just did that because the keys are not case sensitive. So I can do that, like, it's totally fine. Yeah. That is a good question though, because what if I do that? Okay. Let's add another one here for the owners. So, so we have, so how many key value pairs do we have in this object? Yeah, we have 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. And yeah, what are some data types that we have as values in this object? You know, within the key value pairs, but we'll just say the object in general, right? So we have a string, we have a string like that. We have an array, exactly, an array of strings. We have numbers. Let's do one more. Let's do a Boolean. So let's say, is this new? And it's false because the laptop's not new. Perfect. So now we have all of the data types that we've covered so far, if I'm not mistaken. Perfect. All right, so let's see, let's actually see what this looks like. I'm going to console log this. Let's see what laptop looks like when we print it out. Awesome. So here it prints. And see, type XPS, RAM is 3, memory is 1,000, and so on. So that's sort of, we can console log objects just to see what is inside of them. Although here you can sort of see it, but if it's an object that we have not created, it's a good way just to check what's inside of it. Okay, so let's think about how to access our objects. So there are 2 ways to do this. There is something called dot notation. And I will actually contrast and compare these with this example. And then there's something called square notation, or we use square brackets. Now, if you recall, this is very similar to something we've already done with arrays. So remember that example of the array where it was like, we had a bunch of fruit, and then we just did something like X and then the index to grab that. It's very similar to what we're going to do here. So let's actually first do the square bracket notation, just because we have covered that in that context. So how you would do that is you would reference the object, kind of like we have the array, and then you have square brackets in the same way, but instead of putting 0, 1, and 2, 0, 1, and 2 work in arrays because there's an index that is built into arrays where we can use those numbers to grab values at those indices. So let me I will grab this and I will move this here. So the idea is when it comes to arrays, and let me actually remove this owner. So let's just imagine we have, I'm just going to rewrite this right here. This is just an array. Arrays have a built-in index that let us easily access these objects, these strings. So Aleem, Josh, Eric, but these objects don't have that index built into them. So what we need to do is we use these like keys to grab those values. And that's the benefit of having that pairing, is that we can easily grab that. So here we have the key. So let's see, if I want to grab, and I'm going to console log what I grab. If I want to grab the RAM, laptop, square bracket, and then inside of this, I will put the RAM. And here we actually need to put the quotations around it, because we're using this, right? And this is just to show that these are actually strings. Even if they don't have quotations here, just for convention, these are strings. So I'm looking inside this laptop app object, and I'm going to use the attribute RAM to grab the value associated with that key that is RAM. So let's print that out and let's see what we get. Perfect, so we get 3. That's one way to do it. Perfect, so I noticed someone here mentioned, right, this is a great, someone mentioned here, right, so that is our dot notation. So dot notation is a bit different. And the usefulness of dot notation is that we don't actually need to make these square brackets. We don't need to type, this out in that way. One other way we could do it is we could have our object and we just put dot and then the attribute. This dot's very important. So let's try that. We would do laptop dot, and then, see, these are all the things we could grab from it. So let's do laptop.ram. Let's see what this gives us. So that also gives us 3. So these are both ways to access values inside of objects, specifically values that are associated with these keys. In this case, the value 3, that's the RAM. It's associated with the key RAM. Does anyone have any questions about these two ways of accessing objects? It's called square brackets. Yeah, that's square notation or square brackets. Either works. As long as the difference between them is clear and like how to use them. Yeah, I'd say that's, yeah, awesome. There's one more thing I should mention that could be interesting is that this key, because this is in this case it was a string. Let's say we want to be fancy, and let's say the key we want to grab is the owners. So this is one other way we could do it. So the idea here is that this, I'm just typing in key to represent it. This key is the variable key here that has the value owners. So this is the same as writing laptop owners. That's just another way of doing it. And let's see, what is this going to return when I run this? What is this going to return in my, over here? Exactly, it'll return all three names. Perfect, and it does. So that's just a fancier way of doing it, where we can, when it comes to the square notation, we can do that. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered so far? So I see a good question here. So now we're thinking about, okay, what if I want to grab the owners, but I don't just want the owners, maybe I want like the first owner. Right, so let's see, what does that do? So we actually, we will get to that later, but that can be done. But yeah, we'll get to that later. Because that is going to introduce concepts of like methods that I will get to later in this lecture. Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, I will give you a hint. To the person who asked that, I'll give you a hint, and I'll say, think about the value that is being returned, the type of value array, and the fact that we have built-in methods that can return the first element in an array. So that's just, I'll mention that. Why didn't you? Line 16. Oh, okay, so I did not put this, like owners, into here just to show that instead of having this string just directly be inside these square brackets, I can set the string, the key that I want to access, to a variable key, and I can put this in here. And the thing is, when JavaScript executes this, it will be like, okay, it'll first do that. So it'll first take the variable, and it'll say, okay, this variable here, I'll put the value into that. So it'll see that, and then it will be like, oh, okay, that's going to be the array laptop owners. That's going to be that array. I'm going to access the object and return the value. Will be this, and then that'll print a console. Yeah, it's just another way of doing that. Another person has a good question here. Can we put the laptop key in variable to access the? Absolutely. So one other thing we can do, and why not, let's just say our memory, and we can do this. We can do dot memory. And so now, if I console log memory, what am I going to get here when I console log this? This is another thing I can do here. Exactly, so I will get 1,000. Let's try that. Perfect, so we get 1,000. The 1,000 here, this one. Let me rerun that. Yeah. So someone here is mentioning these are some pretty complex operations I see happening here. So yeah, so when we do this, let me see here. Because when we do, so if we do laptop, and this will sort of circle back to the array lecture. When we do laptop.owners, this returns an array. And there are a lot of, I mean, we call these methods. So these are a lot of built-in methods into the array. So we can do that. That's one thing we could do. However, we cannot do, if we were to do this dot push, right? The idea is that this, because this returns the array, this returns the first element of the array, which is a string, and string.push does not really work. But laptop.owner, or owners, returns an array. So it would be like, when this is evaluated, these laptop.owners would become the array. Aleem, Josh, and so on. And then it would just be like doing dot push orange on this array. And that totally works. All right, does anyone have any questions about sort of how to access objects? Any questions on what we've done so far? Accessing objects, or dot versus square notation. Yeah, I'd say don't worry too much about. So we'll cover. There are a lot of like other things mentioned here, like retrieving keys. So these are all things that we will talk about later. And actually, a little bit later in this lecture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you why we have those methods in arrays. Yeah, so you can retrieve all keys. That is something built in, but that's something we will talk about later. So push orange, from our last lecture, arrays have a push method that lets you push like items into the array. So I can just quickly mention that here. So imagine we have an array, and yeah, let's just do like the array is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These arrays there's something called push methods where you can take this array, and let's do it here. Let's say let x equal. You can do x dot push, and I'll explain the significance of this dot and how it's related to what we've been talking about so far. But if we just think of this as its own isolated thing, we can do this. And what this does is it pushes 6 into this array. And let me actually, so it will, and let's just, why not? Let's print it out over here. So let's say we have an array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you can see here, y.push. So this adds new elements to the array. Let's push 6, and let's console log our array, and let's see what that looks like. So it's going to push 6 into the end of the array. So our new array will look like that. All right. Perfect. Exactly. Yeah. And I hope this explanation is clear, like why this does not work. Does not work. Okay, perfect. Does anyone have any other questions? So yeah, next we are exactly, yeah. Awesome. Let's just try doing pop, and let's see what happens. So yeah, so pop returns the last element, or it removes the last element 5 exactly. There's shift and unshift. Wait, what? Hey, whoops. Exactly. So let's. I remember someone mentioned like, could I get? Let's see. I'm just reading these. Okay, so let's check out this shift. Removes the first element from an array and returns it. So I remember you mentioning, what if I want to grab the this from the owners? So that's one method you could use to grab that. All right, perfect. So if we don't have any other questions, we are going to take a 10-minute break before we come back. And when we come back, we're going to go a little bit deeper into objects, and we're going to show how the objects relate to arrays and strings. Because like sort of these, like, isn't it interesting? You're probably saying, why am I able to type like a dot here? And like, is this dot related to this dot notation? At least that sort of is something I see here as interesting, but it's kind of weird that, I can have a dot here and then I have a dot here. So, when we come back from our break, I'll go into that and explain why that is and where that comes from. So we'll be back in 10 minutes at 9:13. All right, so let us continue with the lecture. Can everyone see my screen? This one here. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk about objects inside of objects. So, and this might be something you were thinking about, because I mentioned that when we have these key value pairs, the value can be any data type. So let me just quickly write that down here. Key value. And this value could be any data type. So we're going to talk about the value actually being another object and what implications that would have for trying to access, for doing, accessing these types of things. So, one thing we could think of in terms of a real world example would be imagine a briefcase. So this is my briefcase. This is the briefcase. You open the briefcase, and now inside of this briefcase, oh, handles there. All right. So inside this briefcase, we have our laptop, maybe we have a water bottle, and like an apple. So these are three objects we have inside of a briefcase, which we can also think of as an object. And yeah, let's move to the code and show how we would do this and what sorts of implications that would have. So let me open my VS Code, move that here. All right, let's take a look at this. So I've already defined laptop. So maybe we can just use, we'll use the laptop that I've already defined. And I'm just going to comment these out. Don't worry, I will be uploading like an edited version of these with all the examples we covered in class. So that will be uploaded. But for now, I'm just going to erase that. I'm going to move this here. So this is our laptop, right? And then I remember I mentioned like some of these other objects. So like the water bottle, and let's say, what are some attributes we can think of for a water bottle? Like, I'm just thinking like brand. Does anyone drink any fancy brands of water? ABC, Voltaic, nice. Fiji, all right, let's do Fiji water. All right, and maybe we can have even the cost. How much does the Fiji water cost, like a bottle of Fiji water? $100. Dang, that's a lot. All right, we'll just put $100, and we'll just put the number 100 and just say, okay, that's going to represent dollars. Yeah. And then let's say the weight or the amount is 2 kilograms. Perfect. Think of another object we can have. So we'll have an apple. And what we will do is, here, let me put I will put weight here. This is going to be 3 kilograms. All right, so for apple, I'm also thinking brand. What are some types of apples? I know there's like a Granny Smith, which are the green ones. Yeah, Gala. Oh, Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp is very good. I'm going to put that. Honeycrisp. Perfect. And let's say this apple is a giant apple. It's 1 kilogram. Oops, missing that. All right, perfect. So we have three objects. We have our laptop, we have the water bottle, and we have an apple. I've defined these here. So now let's think about our backpack. So our backpack is going to have like multiple of these objects inside of it. So let's say backpack is also an object. And let me think, what are some ways we might want to store this? You know, all right, I'm also going to add that just in case. All right, so what are some ways we might want to store these objects in the backpack, knowing we have keys and values, and we can store sort of data into the value. So what are some ways we can think of maybe storing these things in the backpack? So to give a hint, I will just put weight first. And actually, let's not put weight. Yeah, so we could put a key. We could do this. So what this is doing is we're saying, okay, I'm going to use the key apple and pair it to this object apple I've defined here. Yeah, so this is one thing. Yeah, we could do first object apple. We could even name it apple, and I'm pretty sure this will work. So if I do backpack, and then remember, so how would I grab this apple? How would I return the apple, or how would I grab it from the backpack in this sort of example? Exactly, dot apple. Or I could also do that, apple. Let's do it. Perfect. This is one way, this is another way we could do it as well. Awesome. So see how that console logs the object, Honeycrisp, weight 1, color red. Perfect. All right. So we could do that. So we'll do apple and water. We'll just do water bottle. And what should I finish this with? What would be my last key value pair? Nope, not default. There's no default is for switch case. So I'm defining key value pairs for this. But good question. Exactly, laptop. Awesome. So laptop is my key. What's my value going to be according to what I've defined here? Perfect, laptop. So what I could also do though is I could just, I could do this too. And the reason why I'm gonna do that is doing this is essentially the same as just doing this, water bottle. Because what JavaScript will do is it'd be like, oh, okay, so I'm referencing this variable here as the value. So this variable here is the same as this. So I'm just going to take this and put that here. So it's very similar. So I'm just going to do that just so you can see that those two things are the same. Perfect. And all right, so if I console, no, so it does not create a new key. But I guess what you could say is that this object, so this one here, like this, is not the same as this, because this is like I'm almost creating a new object inside the value. Right, so we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that later. That's a good question. So I'm going to console log backpack, and let's see what we get when we console log that. Hopefully we get all the objects. Perfect. So we get all these objects. So we have one parent, like this big object, the backpack, and then we have three of these objects inside of the backpack with the keys, right? So the best way to think about it would be, so we have this key value pair. Apple is the key and value is this object. We have this one, key is water, the value is this, and then so on. Which part in particular? Oh, like this bit, me copying over laptop. Okay, so I just wanted to do that because you could also, I'm just showing another way of doing this. You don't need to define, so here we first define the object for water bottle. We said let water bottle equal, and then we have our object here. And then here, when I want to put that object inside of the backpack, I just did water as a key and value water bottle. So this is just to show that you don't need to do that. You can actually just write it like this as well. So the key, and then you can literally just write the value, the object explicitly here. But alternatively, I could also just do that, and that would work as well. So both ways work. I hope that clarifies just those two, sort of the difference between doing that and that. Yep, that definitely makes more sense. So we'll put fruit there. But how would this change the, so this is a question for everyone. If I put fruit here, how would that change how I get this apple from the backpack? So how would I, yeah, so it changes the key name. So if I would not, this would no longer work now. I would need to do dot fruit. Perfect. Okay, so this is a good example, but let's think of how should I change this backpack to get the let's say I don't want to have like 3 of these. I just want to have one key, and then somehow I want to represent all those objects, to be paired with that one key, or the value associated with that one key. So maybe I have like items, and then the value is somehow like I can put the laptop, the fruit, and the water just together. So what's one way I can do that instead of having 3 separate key value pairs, just having one? Exactly. So I can use an array, and we are going to do that. So let's change this. And instead of that, let's have items. So what would I put here? So I just did square brackets. And what could I put here just to make, yeah, what would I put inside of items? So it's a good, I'm noticing some people might, exactly. So apple, oops. So I have to like refer to the variable that I define here. Now I could also just do this. I could do that, but you can see it's going to get a little bit crowded if I do that. So I'm just gonna, that's why I define the objects here. So I'm just gonna say apple, water bottle, and laptop. So when I do this, it's very important that I do not use strings, because if I do this and this are different. This laptop is a variable, the variable laptop, this guy. This is a string laptop. So I just want to clarify that these two things are different. Perfect. Now, how would I console log the items? Like, how would I get these 3 items printed out? Just the items. I don't want like I don't want to print the whole backpack. Yeah. Because maybe the backpack has other attributes, like let's say brand, and let's say what's it's a good brand for this backpack. Sure, Gucci. So I just want the items. I don't want the entire backpack. Remember, backpack is an object, so we'll start with the object. And how do we access? So we can use dot, right? So we can use dot items, as you can see here, or we could do that as well. Let's do dot items. Let's see what we get. Perfect. So these are the items that we get. All right. Does anyone have any questions on that so far? Oh, that's a good question. Can we do type of backpack? Let me try that. Let's see what that gives us. I would imagine it would give us an object, but it's a good thing to check. Console logs are very important. Yep. So it tells us that this is an object because it is sort of, we use these curly braces. And so accessing specific items in that object in the backpack, we use dot and square notation. So here, if I want to get I can do that. Alternatively, I can do that. So these are two ways to access the same thing in that backpack. Gucci for both. So Samra, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so when I'm doing console.log backpack.items, so it will print all the details of all the items, like because items are objects again. So it will give me the attributes of those objects as well, which are in the backpack.
Exactly. So let's just print that again. Let's see. So yeah, we'll get the array, and then each of the items is gonna exactly as an object, and we'll see all the attributes for each of those as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's try that. Yeah, this is a good. These are good questions. Let's see. What does this give us? Probably an array, I would have to say. Ooh, interesting. So this gives us an object as well. And that is because arrays are objects. So on the next few slides, I will talk about how arrays are actually objects and what that means, right? Because you might be thinking like, why am I able to use dot notation to do things on arrays like push and pop and so on? And so I'll get into that later. Yeah, that's a very good, this is a good thing to note. So backpack.items also gives us object. But before we get there, I see here that someone mentioned backpack.weight, which is a very good question. You know, why don't we have the weight of the backpack? Right? Because the apple is 1 kilogram, the water bottle is 2, and the laptop is 3. So maybe the weight of the backpack should be 6, right? So what we're gonna do is we are going to, in real time, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to set the weight of this backpack to a certain value, and that value is gonna be the sum of all these, the weights of each of these individual items. And we're going to use this as an example to see how to change or add attributes to objects that already exist without having to, like, during the creation phase, put those key value pairs or those attributes into the backpack, into the object, in this case a backpack. So let's do that. So we're going to say backpack weight is equal to something. So let's actually first grab the weight. Let's first find the weight of this backpack. Now, since I'm gonna need to use, well, this is an array, right? So I need to iterate over everything in this array. So maybe we could use a for loop. And, you know, each of these objects has a weight. So I'm probably going to need to like grab the weight and add it together. I'm going to have something that's called a sum. So this is just a throwback to arrays and how we iterated through them. So let's say we start at 0. And we're going to keep going until we are at the length of backpack.items. So the idea here is that, and I will actually draw this out. So backpack.items is going to be apple, water bottle, and laptop, right? All this is doing is just, I'm making a loop, and then on the first iteration of the loop, I is 0, on the second, I is 1, and on the last iteration, I is 2. That's all I'm doing. All this is doing is that it's going to run some code inside, and for every time that code runs, my value of I will update until I hit the end of backpack.items. So all this is doing is it's letting me get like a changing value of I. And I should mention here that the reason why I have I less than this and not less than or equal is that the length is actually 3. Because when we want to find the length, we start at 1. This is actually 1. Like just having an apple is a length of 1, and then 2, and then 3. Whereas here we're starting from 0 because that a convention is to start at the 0 index. And we're also going to use this to access elements in this array. And I mentioned that when we do that, the access starts at 0. So this first item has an index of 0. Even though the length of an array, which only had an apple in it, the length of that is 1, but the index of that first item is 0. Does that make, does this sort of this setup make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about why I'm starting with this for loop to try to get the weights? All right, awesome. Let us continue. So you might be thinking, so let's first just, so when I is 0, let's actually grab this first object. So how might we do that using the array access? And let's just say my object, I'm going to set it to something. Yeah, we're going to go in. So accessing the array. So this is the array, right? And remember that we use square brackets to access this array because backpack.items is actually the array. We have to look inside of backpack. Backpack.items returns the array. And so we use square brackets with arrays to actually get the elements inside of arrays. Yeah, so we'll use I. Because on our first run, I is 0. So backpack.items and this I will give us apple. So this object on the first run will be apple. And let's console log this just so we know that we're actually getting our object. So what is this console log going to print on my first run? The first time I run through this loop? Exactly. So it'll print this apple, right? But if I actually run this, it'll print every object. So we should see 3 objects printed. And so what this is telling us is that at this point in time, that's sort of how it's, my object is just going to be this. Okay, perfect. how do I grab the weight from this object? So remember, every object, each of these objects that I'm grabbing, I have a key that is weight. Yeah, so we could, that's one way we could do it, but how, let's say I've already got backpack.items I from my object. So how will I get the weight? There's a shortcut that we can use. So remember the item, the actual object itself that we grab, the apple, the water bottle, the laptop, that's going to be stored inside of this, my object variable. So how can we use my object variable to grab the weight? Exactly, so we can do my object.weight. Perfect. And so this is going to give us the weight. So let's console log this weight. And we should get all the weights, which we have apple. Apple was, I think, was 1, and then water bottle is 2, and laptop is 3. So we should get 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Because I'm just console logging the weights as I proceed through this loop. Awesome. Okay. Now, how do I like, I want to keep track of these weights. Exactly, right. So I want to add, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to find out the weight of all the items in the backpack. So, and I'm using this sum to represent that total weight. So what I'm doing here is that I want to modify sum, that it's outside of this loop. I want to modify sum in a way that reflects these weights being added continually. So there's something I can do here. I can say sum, my new sum. So as I'm going through, let's say the apple, my new sum is going to be my old sum plus, plus something. So what is that thing I need to add to my old sum to properly reflect the new weight? Exactly. Now, the reason why I have this here is because on like the second run of the loop, let's say I'm looking at water bottle, I need to grab the previous sum, add the weight of the water bottle, and then set that, like, the results of that addition to the new sum. And that's like an idea of keeping track. It has a memory. It's keeping track of sort of the weight so far as we proceed through this. Okay, perfect. And then if I console log that, I will get, 6. And I think just to make things a bit more clear, what I'm going to do is I'm going to okay, so I'm actually going to run this in a debugger just to show sort of what this would look like at that point. So let's see. So at that point, let's add our, okay, perfect. So we have our sum. At this point in the code, the sum is 0. So let's continue. So right now our object is undefined. Yep, we have one weight element. So we have one weight. So weight key value pair for each of these objects. Each of these objects have a weight other than the backpack. So apple, water bottle, laptop. So right now we're just gonna use a debugger to proceed through the for loop and just see what's happening inside. So at this point in time, my object is undefined because this line of code has not run. The line of code that's gonna grab the item from the backpack and put it inside object. Once that line runs, see how my object is now, it's essentially the apple, right? Brand, Honeycrisp, color red, weight is 1. That has been modified. I'll do that. So that's been updated. The weight is still undefined because we have not executed line 61 yet. So we haven't actually set the weight to my object dot weight, which is 1. Once we do that, this weight is 1 kilogram. And then now we're at this point, sum equals sum plus weight. So when we run that line, now we get 1 for the sum. And in that manner, we're going to proceed through this loop, constantly updating. My object is now the apple, or sorry, my bad. My object is now the water bottle, the Fiji water bottle, with a weight of 2. Once I run that line, weight is now 2 instead of 1. It's been updated. And now I'm going to say, okay, my new sum is going to be my old sum, 1 plus the weight. 1 plus 2, it's 3. And then I grab the laptop, which has a weight of 3. So that weight is now 3 to reflect that. And then the sum is now going to be 3 plus 3, which is 6. So now the sum is 6. And then we exit just like that. All right, does anyone have any questions about that for loop? So if we want to access only one of the weights, we can use, we don't need to, like in this case, I'm grabbing all of them, but if you just want one of the weights, you could just do, so there's something like a nested sort of thing. We could do backpack.items. That gives us all the items, right? So that gives us an array. We can use the bracket notation with an index. So this will give us the first item in that array. And the first item is an apple, which is an object. And then on that, we can do dot weight. So that's if we just want one of the weights. I'm just going to console log that out. But in this case, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to find a way to get all the weights, add them up, and then update this backpack so it reflects the total weight. Yeah, that's backpack has no weight. That's a good. Let's actually. Well, we're gonna let's assume this is a special backpack. It does not. It has 0 weight. Right. It's a great question. The difference between objects and arrays. So I'm actually going to get a little bit more into this later. But I think a good way to think about this is that the array has a built-in index, and object does not. Now, of course, there's a difference in like how we have square brackets versus curly, and that objects are a set of key value pairs, whereas arrays are a collection of items of any data type. And one key difference, again, is that the arrays are indexed. So there's a built-in index that lets us access the first, the second, the third, and so on in the array. Now, objects don't have that built-in index. Yeah, so that's a good point. So if there's no weight in one of these objects, there will be some issues. And you can try modifying that to see what'll happen when we do that. When should we use objects? It's a great question. I think it depends on the use case. Sometimes if it really depends. It's hard for me to answer that without like very specific examples. So dot weight, this is a dot notation for accessing the value associated with the weight key in my object. This is just a way of accessing something in that object. Yep, Samra, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so you just said, Alim, that objects don't have a built-in index, but in this very example, we have accessed the items of the object using a for loop, like for using indexes. So how we were able to do so?
Because backpack.items is an array.
Backpack.items is an array.
Yes. Now arrays are also objects, so I wouldn't get too much into the arrays versus objects, but arrays are a special type of object. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And that comes with this sort of built-in index that lets us easily access items. Yeah. So this, like, I'm not actually iterating over the object, because backpack.items.length
Hmm.
is the same as writing 3. So if I did 3 here, that this would still run exactly the same, and we can actually see that. That would still give me 6. I just did that because backpack.items is the array, and then .length gives me the length of that array. So that's one way to think about it. Okay, awesome. So if everybody is okay on that, we can continue. I just see there's a good, so I think this is a good question cover. There's no weight. What if there is no weight? Will we get an error? Right, so that's a good example. So if we have no weight, let's say the apple has no weight. Let's see what's going to happen here. Let's just try that. I'm curious. We get NaN. So, you know, why that happens? Exactly, yeah. So very good. That's a great question. Perfect. So NaN is because when we try to access, let's say the apple's weight, it's going to give us undefined. And when you try to add like a number to undefined, right? So what we would do, what would actually happen here is there would be, the first time we run this, I believe apple is the first item. It would be like, okay, sum, the first line of code will just be like, okay, sum equals sum plus weight. But remember, the weight for the apple is undefined. So it would be something like this, sum equals 0 plus undefined. So if we console log that, 0 plus undefined, that will give us NaN. And then NaN is the sum, and then we're just adding the weights to NaN. It's going to stay NaN. So that's why that's not a number, or we're going to get not a number. Great question. All right, does anyone have any other questions before we proceed? What does the I in line 61? Like this I? Right, so this I, this is part of how we run a for loop. So yeah, this is specific to for loops. It is a counter. A counter is a good way to think of it. So on the first run through this for loop, we're starting at I equals 0, and then we're just checking, okay, is I less than the length of the backpack items array? Is I less than 3? If it is, it is. So we're gonna then go into this. And I think someone has, how are we getting the weight from, so backpack.items gives us an array, and then we use the square notation with I, it'll be 0 on the first run, to grab the apple. And then we say let weight equals myObject.weight. Apple is stored into the variable myObject, and then .weight will just return the weight of the apple, which is 1, and then we add that to our sum, and that's sort of how we proceed. Yep, Samra, I see you have a question. How can I help?
No, sorry, that was just from before. Let me just lower my hand.
Oh, okay, no worries. All right, so now we have the sum. So let's see, how are we gonna update the special backpack that has with the weight? And remember, this backpack is special. It does not weigh anything. Somehow has 0 weight. It's only the weight of the things inside of it. So we will use the same notation. Now, in this case, you do need to use square brackets because we're creating a new key value pair in this backpack. And we will say weight equals sum. And that will create the new that'll create the new key value pair. So we're just going to print that. And now you can see, so now we have, brand, we have all the items here, and now we have a new attribute, weight. So I hope that clarifies things on just how to add attributes to existing objects. In this case, we had to do a little bit of extra work here just because this was a something that would involve, the weight, adding all the weights of all the items before it, or all the items inside of this backpack. All right, so before we end, I remember I mentioned, good question. So let's say we want to delete this key. That's a great question. So let's say we add, I'll be sending the file very soon. So if we want to delete this key, weight, we can just do delete backpack.weight. Now, weight doesn't exist, so it doesn't exist yet in this backpack. It's not part of the definition. So we would do that. Let's see, that should work. Let me print that out. Exactly. So now we don't have any weight. But let's say the items are actually, I don't want to see the items anymore. So now we can use that notation because items already exists where we define the backpack. So we can just do dot items here. Yeah. And now it'll be a little bit easier to see the weight of the backpack. Yeah, brand and then weight. Awesome. So with that being said, I think that, so this is not necessary, like this bit is not actually necessary for your lab and for the questions, but it's a good thing to know that arrays and strings can also be thought of as objects. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I will be showing some code as well. That might be confusing, but don't worry about the code, worry more about what the code will print out. So let's think of strings as objects first. So, when we declare a string, let's just say let my name equal Aleem. One thing you've noticed is that you have a bunch of these, like, if you do name and then dot, you have a bunch of like things that you can do with the name. Let's actually take a look at that. Let's just console log that out. So if I were to do let name equals Aleem, you might notice that if I do a dot here, oops, what's going on here? Name is, oh wait, my bad. My name. So name is actually, seems like it's an actual keyword. So I can't do that. Let's just use that name. So like notice all these methods, right? You might be thinking like, what's going on? Like, why do I have, this is kind of weird. Like, why can I do these things on something that's just a string, right? So, one way to think of this, and I'll show it very shortly. So let's console log, my name.length, console.log, my name dot to lowercase. So if I do these two things, I should get the length of my name and my name in lowercase. But it's a good question to ask, like, why am I able to do this? This is a string. And then why do I have this like dot notation? That's kind of odd. So, the reason why that actually works is that when we create a string like this, you can almost think of, there is the perfect string. called a perfect string. Or I will call it, exactly, these are inbuilt functions to string, but I'm going to explain why are they even inbuilt? Isn't this just a string? It's not an object. But what's actually happening is that there is a prototype string that is an object. And it has all these methods. It sort of looks like this. It has keys and values. So it has like length, and then a particular way it's not a value as how we think of it, but it is a method that lets us get the length. It has two lowercase, and then a method that it's an internal representation of how we get the length. So that's why, and notice that like these are keys, and we access keys using dot notation. And so when we create this string, with our name, we get access to all these these powerful tools. This is one way to think of it, that exist in here. Does anyone have any questions about this idea here? Okay, awesome. So I see a good question here. So can we consider a string as an array of char? So we actually can't, because if it was an array of char, we would be able to just use the square brackets notation to access it. So we actually can't. It's a little bit different, but I'd say, that's something you can check out using documentation just to confirm that it's different. Yeah, I'd say don't worry about char. So these very specific questions, I would highly recommend seeing documentation on strings just to cover that. But as far as the lecture is concerned, you don't need to worry about chars. So, what I'm showing here, the reason why I brought this up is that when we make a string like this, we get access to all these. There are a bunch of methods that we can use that have dot notation, right? Like dot length. Let me dot, right? These are all these we have access to so many methods that essentially come with using a string. And when I console log these, yeah, so I'm getting 5, the length of the string, and then also I'm turning the string into lowercase. The reason why we get access to these is that we have this perfect, or we have a prototype string that is an object. And so every string we create gets access to these methods that are defined in that object. And again, it's an object because, again, see length, we have a key length, and then we have we don't have to worry about this, but there's an internal method that handles how to determine length. We have a key to lowercase internally defined how to do that. So that's why when we do this and we use the dot notation for objects, we now have access to all these things. Oh no, that's a good question. Would the dot notation be considered a string object? So I don't think it's a string, but console, as far as I know, I do think console is a type of object, and that's why we can do dot, and we have all these methods, and right, these exist as keys almost, and we have log, and so that's a method that exists to us or for us. Yeah. All right, actually, let me see. Do I say not to? Oops. Just gonna open this on another file. Let's close that. Let's see here. I want to see if I can grab and print all these key value pairs, or at least the names of them, just so you can see that it is indeed an object. Okay, I think this is one good way to do it. So again, don't worry too much about the code here, but this is just to appreciate this idea. So I'm just going to grab the string prototype and I'm going to get the names of the properties that are in this string prototype. So don't worry too much about this, but all I'm going to do is I just want to see if this works. Okay. So what this is doing is it's grabbing an object and it's printing, a good way to think about this is that this is printing all the key value pairs in this object. So notice how if I'm going to do my name is Aleem and then I do my name dot, notice how these are the same as these. Character code at right here, character code at, concat. So these, here we have keys and the values are functions that return something. So functions is something we're going to cover later, but you can think of function as just like there's an input and there's an output and there's like a box and we don't need to worry about what happens inside. So, but essentially these are these methods. These methods do things for us. And so here I'm just grabbing this like perfect prototype string object, which is an object, and I'm just showing that these are the key value pairs inside this object. And these are the same things when we do my name dot, we get access to all of these methods and they all exist here. Match, match, we don't need to worry about, but see to lowercase, that's a key and it's a function. So when we do to lowercase here, we are using something that is defined in this prototype string. So that is an object. So that's why we use this dot notation to sort of do these things. It's the same thing. It's the same as an array. And there's also an array prototype. And let me actually do that. I'm going to change that to array prototype. And I'll just show you that, push and pop also exist in that. So the array prototype is also an object. And I'm just printing out key value pairs. And see here, pop and push exist here, which is why we can do this. X equals 1, 2, 3, X dot, push, or X dot, and we can find it here. So I'd say don't worry too much about like what functions are, but this idea that we have we have these predefined objects as prototypes with these built-in, these are built-in, and they're comprised of key value pairs, and that when we create these things, we are sort of getting access to those methods that are already defined in these key value pairs. So this is just to sort of extend this idea of objects to the strings and arrays that we've already been working with. Yeah, don't worry too much about sort of how I did this, but this is just to show this idea. For sure, yeah, I'll copy this code. I think during the lunch break, what I'll do is I will compose a doc of all the methods we've covered so far. And yeah, I will do that. All right, so let's take a look at our assignment today for this lecture. So I think now, unless if anybody has any questions, we still have time, so we can. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about sort of anything that we've covered? Arrays, objects, using documentation, data types, debugger, console logs, labs. Yep, Samra.
Yeah, so it's not a question. I have a request that if you can please, I'm not sure if you have been sending files, but rather than sending on the chat, if you can upload it on Canvas, because I attend lecture using my phone and then I work on the laptop. So I don't use Zoom on my laptop, so I don't get to access your files.
Yep, no worries. I will upload these on Canvas.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm about to be, wait, okay, let's see. Yeah, so I'd say don't worry too much about prototype. Prototype is like, it's just a term that we use. It's to refer to this like string object that has all these things built in. So that's what I was printing out there. So whenever we create a string, we get access to that because, well, that's just how it is. We gain these methods. The right term is we inherit them, but that's something we'll cover later. So a good way to think about it is just like when we create a string, somewhere else built into JavaScript, we have a string prototype. And we get the methods that have been defined in this string prototype, which is an object. And because it's an object, it is a set of these key value pairs where we have like to lowercase, and then we have the method that gives us the lowercase string. And so that's why we can do, name dot lowercase string or to lowercase. All right, let's go over. Does anyone have any questions? I hope that clarified things with the prototype. Yeah, let's do another example. So let's do it here. And let's use arrays instead. So we have a prototype array. Don't need to worry too much about what prototype means, but you can think of this as just, this is actually an object, and this is built into JavaScript. This is an object that's built into JavaScript. And so this is a set, because it's an object, it's a set of key value pairs. One key we might have is push. So push is the key, and then here internally it'll define the method that is the value that is associated with this push, and the value is actually a function. Now we're going to cover functions in the next lecture, but a good way to think of functions is functions are sort of things that let us do what we want. They have an input and they give us an output that we want. So that's a good way to think about functions. They accomplish things for us. And so the function is a value associated with a key push that exists in this prototype array object. Now, don't worry too much about prototype, but you can just think this is something that is built into JavaScript internally. So when we create an array, let's call it X, and let's say 1, 2, 3, this array gets methods from that prototype array object. And that's part of the reason why we can use dot notation, because dot notation is something that is for objects, but we can do X and then dot. And that gives us access to all, as you see in the dropdown, all those methods that let us essentially very easily accomplish tasks. So like X dot push. And if we type in 7, the push is referring to this function that adds 7 to the end of this array. All right, so I also see, yeah, debugger. Okay, so let's check out the debugger. So I will use, let me just comment that out. Is it all right if I use this example again for the debugger? I think this is a good example. So Okay, awesome. So let's check this out. So the idea with the debugger is just we set breakpoints, and we have to set breakpoints before we run it, just so it runs, properly. So I have these breakpoints, and the idea with the debugger is that we will just click run and debug. We hit run and debug, and then it might tell us like what environment. We select node. There's a drop down up here. But the idea with the debugger is that it's going to let us execute code line by line or breakpoint by breakpoint, and it stops at that breakpoint, and it lets us see what is internally, like what is in the memory, right? So these are variables in the memory. I've already put these to watch, so that's sort of permanent. But if I hit next, right, so sum is 0 now, right? Now these two are undefined. But the idea is that we can see in real time as we execute through this program, these variables being updated, or because how JavaScript actually executes this code. So we see my object backpack.items I. So I is 0. I is 0 here. So we're going to grab the 0th item in backpack.items. We can even see backpack items. So we're going to grab this thing here. Right, so we grab the apple. So the apple is now set to, now that that line is run, we're on the next line. And so the apple's now been set to my object. So my object equals the apple object, this variable, my object. So weight is my object.weight, this, my object. That should be 1, right? So that's set to 1. And then the sum is set to sum plus weight. So 0 plus my weight. Now the sum is 1. And now the next time through this loop, I has been updated to 1 because we're updating I here. And so just like that, so that's sort of how we would use the debugger in this case. And as you can see, these are changing as we proceed through the program. Perfect. And then we just exit. So I hope that clarifies that idea. All right. So what we have next is we have a lab for y'all to complete. So we have 2 hours to do this lab, or we've allocated 2 hours of time today to do it, but don't worry, it's not due today. And let me pull out this lab and I'll just explain it a little bit. So for this lab, we're going to create an object representing ourselves. And so it should have properties like name, age, a student. We want you to print the entire object. And so I would say for each of these, access it, use console log, sometimes even using the debugger is useful just to see if the object is being updated properly. But essentially here, these are what we want you to do for today's morning lab. And then we're going to have you recreate an expense tracker. So what I will do is I will actually, if this was not covered, I'm going to go on the expense tracker right now and just review what's going on there. So the expense tracker is, I'll just show it here. So it's on play code, but actually I'm going to copy paste this onto the lecture. And I think I need to install the prompt sync so that works. What's going on here? Uh-oh, that's not good. Oh, I don't have a. All right, let me get rid of that. I'm gonna install prompt sync. I'm just gonna run through this this expenses tracker. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I was missing that that thing. But so in the lab, we do want you to recreate this, but I'll just run through the logic of this and just explain what every line does step by step, and then we'll run through, like in the code, we'll run through it and see what's happening. So we're gonna take user prompt, and we're gonna take that as long as true. So it's just gonna keep running. So here we have a description. So we're gonna get user input as a string, and we want the description of our expense. So maybe just like what it is. So like if you, let's say you buy a water bottle, that Fiji water bottle, and or you type exit to quit. And so we're checking here, okay, so is the description, so notice how we do 2 lowercase. So if you type exit in all caps or some like weird combination of letters, maybe like that or something, it's just gonna change it to lowercase so that this check is true, and then it breaks. So it's gonna break out of the while loop. So if you want to exit, it exits the program, the while loop. Then we get our amount. So, okay, so this, exactly. So this does the same thing, but it's going to convert it into a floating point number. So, you know, that would be like, it's still a number, but it's so it can handle like decimals. At least that's what I'm thinking. We can test that out. So here you enter your expense. So for the Fiji water bottle, that's $100. So we can do that. And then here what's happening is that this is creating an object and putting it into this expenses array. So description and amount are variables. So when we do this, this is the same thing as just doing this. It's the same thing as doing that. If we do it in this way, we're just saving we're just saving space, saving time on to avoid typing that out. And again, as I mentioned earlier, because these are strings, we can also even write it like that. So this is a shorter way of just telling it that I want the key to be the string description and have the value of the variable description that I'm grabbing from here. And I want the key to be amount and the value to be the amount that I grab from here. And so what we're doing is this is going to be an object, and this object is going to be pushed into our expenses array. And then we're just saying that, okay, we add an expense of some dollar amount for some, with some description. Yeah. And then this is a special sort of, I'm using these backticks to, instead of having to like add strings together and do that, you can just use this dollar with curly braces to, and then you can put a variable inside of that, and that'll print the variable as a string. And even here we have a dollar right next to it. This is a string dollar, so we can actually see it's like some set up number of dollars. And then we have this, so this is a new line. And then this is going to keep running until the user wants to exit. And after it exits, it's going to give us a summary. So it's going to say, okay, my total expense is 0. And for each expense in this object, so this for of, this is another way of, so this is another way of looping through objects. We use a for of loop, I think, but I think in the example that I give, I'm going to just do it like this because we have not, I don't recall that being mentioned yet. So that's something we're going to talk about later. But I think we're going to do that. And we're just going to do this, just so that's clear. But the for of can also be used for iterating through arrays. But in this case, let's just use that standard in that case. Does anyone have any questions? So here it's just minus and then the amount of the expense and then the description of the expense. Yeah. So 113 is just a console log. So we're just saying minus some number of dollars. And so expense I grabs us the object from the expenses array, and then dot amount gets us the amount that we set that to. And then this grabs the description. Yeah. I can very quickly clarify. So for iterating through arrays, we can also use, let's just say, so this is one way. So this is essentially the same. This expense is going to be every object in that array of expenses. And so if we have this here, we can avoid we don't need to index into it. We can just do expense.amount instead of doing expenses I.amount, expenses, and expenses I.amount there. That's another way to. Exactly, yeah. So this $sign with curly braces, that lets us put a variable inside of it to print, or anything that is evaluated. So like, you'll notice this is not like this is not a variable, but it's just we're trying to grab a value from an object. So expenses is an array, right? But we use expenses I gets us the object, and then object.description gets us the value, which for a description, the value is a string. So I hope that is clear. For sure, let's run this. Sorry, one sec. Let me just check I think my headphones are almost out of battery. All right, so let's check this out. Let's run this. All right, so let's see. What was it? Fiji water bottle, $100. Honeycrisp apple. Let's say it's a special apple. It's a $50 apple. And then let's exit. So I'll do these all caps just to show that it does work. Ooh, interesting. What's going on here? Dot amount. Did I misspell this? All right, so this is a good example of this. Cannot read properties of undefined amount. Interesting. It's able to do this just fine, but yeah, so it prints the summary. What's going on here? Wait, what's going on? It's total expense plus. Maybe I'm misspelling these. No, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, let's debug this. So the only issue with the debug is that there might be Sorry, let me just check my. Okay, there's still some battery.
I think you
The
have
only
to
issue with
put
the
it
debug.
in a bracket because you did a dollar sign in front of the expenses. No, wait,
Oh,
no, it's in the whole thing.
oh, the whole
Mm.
thing. Wait, where? Maybe I'm missing something. What's going on?
Sure.
Maybe.
But it's taking the whole thing though. Or maybe double quotes, not single quote. No.
No, I think that's okay. I think there's something because it's saying that amount is undefined. So there's something in this object that is. So let me actually, I think what we could do, let's print total expenses here. I want to see if, or my bad. Let's print expenses here. Yeah, let's debug this. So I will actually use console logs because there's an issue with debugging with prompts that I have not fixed.
I think there is no amount because you are entering value. Like you did not enter amount. You enter like VG water, then the value of the amount, but you did not enter a word amount. It's coming like array of array, like 0 of 0. You should enter. You know what I mean? Like expenses of I of another level, like I 0 of 0 index, but not amount. Because if you print the expenses, you're gonna have like an array inside array. Try
That's
to.
a good point. Yeah, I'm actually. I want to print. I do want to print this. I want to print the. I just want to print the. We're gonna print the expenses. Let's see. That's a good point. We will. That actually might be the case. But let's print expenses just to see what the array is when we do this. So, Fiji water bottle, 100, and then Apple 50, and then let's quit. Oh wait, whoops. I need to type in quit here. I need to type exit. Exit is for quitting. Okay. So the amount does exist in each object.
Try to console.log expenses after you enter it. Like write another line, like expenses.summary, outside of the loop, I mean. Like the whole expenses that the user enter it before the for loop. Yeah, it's
Wait, so this
yeah.
or
Console. Yeah, this one should. Okay, this one expenses. Yeah, should printed.
and when we print it, we get this. So this is interesting.
Oh.
We're getting, yeah, because it's saying that amount can't read properties of undefined. Maybe there's an issue. Maybe expenses I. Oh, you know what? It is very. It's so. This is a good. This is a good example of a bug. It has to do with my for loop itself and where I'm checking when I'm have to exit this for loop. I made a small error, but the error broke the whole program. And it's just one sign is wrong in this error. So I think it's on line 107. Yeah, it's on line 107. It's a very small thing, but it breaks everything. Exactly. So it's this. So this is the error because remember the length of an array, because the length of an array is not 0 indexed, but my index is like grabbing the items is 0 indexed. So if I do that, that's the error. That versus that. So I mean, again, another way to how this was originally written was the constant of, like, expense of expenses. If you do it that way, you don't need to worry about these sort of errors. But yeah, let's see, does that run? Fiji 100, and then let's do Apple 20. Oh yeah, exit. Okay, so now it runs. But yeah, thanks everyone for helping me out there for how to debug that. Because I would not have noticed. I don't think I would have noticed that for quite a while. All right, awesome. Does anyone have any questions about the expenses tracker?
Can you keep the code, the original code as it is, to just compare it with the one that you change it?
For sure. Yeah, I will have the original one as well.
So
Right,
is our
so-
lab going to primarily look like the example you just did?
Yes. So the lab will be this bit, sort of making this object and sort of using console logs and modifying objects. And then also the lab will be recreating this expenses tracker from scratch. And then, you know, on top of that, there's just like extra challenges to categorize expenses. So maybe it also says like, you also have a prompt where you're asking the user to like, what type of expense is this, right? And then you have some extra code that handles like maybe grouping together these expense objects into their own, let's say, arrays that that are specifically for that category. Maybe even a budget limit. And if someone tries to put something else in, and you go beyond that budget, it's like, oh, sorry, you're sort of going beyond the budget, and then it exits. So these are all things that that can be done. But I thought I would just really quickly show sort of what this might look like. I think I will. I don't think. I mean, if anybody has questions, I can sort of explain this. But I think posting this might be counterintuitive because you could just copy and paste it. But this, you know, this builds a lot on code that's already there. So, you know, those games that we had y'all make, like the rock, paper, scissors, and like using while loops to do that. It's a very similar structure to what this is. It's almost exactly the same. For sure. The dollar signs. Yeah, let's take a look. So these dollar signs let us, so the dollar signs let us essentially access, so I'll actually get rid of this. The dollar signs let us access variables very easily. So if I say equals 150, and I have, if I use these, I can be like, my age is, and then a dollar with the curly brace, and I can very easily do that. Oops. Because otherwise, I would need to do something like this. I need to be like, my age is, and then comma X, or I would need to be like, you know, my age is plus X. And it gets very tedious when you have many variables in the same string, because then you need to do this, and then you have it starts again, test, and so on. Or, you know, in this case, plus, and so on. Whereas here, you don't need to have those pluses or those commas. You can just do it like that. So it simplifies that process a bit. Oh, so the double was just to say, the double, if I do that, notice how that's green? That is separate from this. And that's just so we see a dollar sign next to it. And so this dollar curly brace, exactly. You know, I think you could print an object. Let's try that out. I don't know what would happen. Let's see what happens if we do that. So I'm changing that. I'm going to change that to this to an object. I have a feeling it'll print. It'll just say object. I don't think it'll actually print it, but let's see. Oh, awesome. So, okay, so notice how here it says object, object for this one. But if you do it like this, then it's going to do that. So Not really for printing objects, but for other data types, it's totally fine. Yeah, so I'd say if anyone has any questions, we do, during this lab, we will take them up. For this in particular, this expense tracker, we do already have code that's there that can help a lot with that. So let me actually pull that up. Like for instance, on week 2, we covered, if I remember correctly, we covered, yeah, like this example. So some of the examples of while loops, the rock, paper, scissors is very similar to, it's even more complicated than this expense tracker. So using, all the logic is there to start to build this. And I think that making it from scratch will help a lot in understanding sort of what's needed. And we already have like files there with code that are good references. Right, so if you miss some part of the lecture, we can try to help you out during lab, but we are recording these as well, so you can always rewatch lectures. All right, and I'll just end with mentioning that parse float is very similar to number, but it lets us also handle decimal numbers. Yeah, but don't worry about using parse float. You can just have it be number, which is what your string input, you can use that to convert your string input into a number. And we do have there are examples that are already written out which are using these. Yeah, so the $sign just lets us, if we have the string as backticks, the $sign just lets us really easily insert a variable into the string without having to do this with the pluses. We can just easily. Exactly, yeah. So and then the number will be capital N number. All right, so I think that is everything. So now we have our lab. Well, we also have a 10-minute break, but so yeah, officially the lab starts in 10 minutes, and we can start taking up some questions then. But again, I would highly recommend this is part of just testing your understanding and practicing. Do try to do the expense tracker from scratch. Like there's code there that already explains, that's like very similar. So reviewing those past examples of the rock, paper, scissors game and like using the while loops in that way, that's already there. There are past lecture recordings that cover a lot of these concepts. There is JavaScript documentation. We've even added here, and I can just show you all that again. Here, JavaScript documentation. So actually, if I go to student view, yeah, so this is visible, and this just takes us to a site here, and you can type in questions you have here. So like if you're like, okay, what is a switch? And oh, there's even a little console here for running that. All right, so take a break for 10 minutes and then we'll be back.